It's a Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies. We're back to normal here. I'm back in Virginia. Damichael, of course, there in Memphis. I was there this past weekend. We're going to lead off the show talking about Memphis winning on Tony Allen night, not just the Grizzlies knocking off the Heat. To be honest with you, we're not going to talk a ton about that. It was a celebration of the most organic thing I've ever experienced in sports. All heart, grit, grind. The grind father, number 9 in the rafters. Let's lock in.
You are Locked On Grizzlies, your daily Memphis Grizzlies podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is a Monday edition of Locked On Grizzlies, and you are locked in with the dynamic duo, Damichael Cole of the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee, award-winning Memphis Grizzlies beat writer for the Commercial Appeal there in Memphis, Tennessee. I am Joe Mullinax, a contributor to Grizzlead, a newsletter writer here for Locked On Grizzlies, and one of the two hosts of our little corner of the internet we like to call Locked On Grizzlies. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Make sure you're checking out Locked On Grizzlies wherever you get podcasts. Like, comment, rate, review, subscribe over on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, literally anywhere you get a podcast. Make Damichael and I a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. And also make sure that you're going over to LockedOnDaily.com. If you haven't already done so, subscribe to our free daily newsletter. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Get Grizzlies words from me, get NBA analysis, fantasy basketball advice, and so much more. Again, LockedOnDaily.com. Go and check them out and make us a part of your NBA and Grizzlies experience in the written word as well. Damichael, I can't say enough how much I enjoyed hanging out with you this past weekend. You were a phenomenal host. You took good care of your old partner. I feel like I impressed you a little bit, right? You introduced me to some folks, and you're like, "Oh, this is Joe Mullinax." And they knew who I was.
Joe.
They knew who I was. I've been around. Like me and Jessica Benson, we go back to the ABC 24 days. Shout out to Jess. Yeah. So, but, you know, it was really cool to go back there. And it was exactly what you said. You know, you always say on the show that people ask how I'm doing. And, you know, you don't really believe it until you experience it. And we had an amazing time. I talked about it on the Saturday show with the folks that we met up with at Blue City Cafe. Just really had a blast. And you were a wonderful, gracious host. And it was great to meet you in person for the first time. And you're doing a phenomenal job. It was really cool. And I told you this. It was really cool to watch you in your element. You're building quite the career there in Memphis. And the city is lucky to have you. Absolutely. The city is obviously lucky to have Tony Allen as well. And I want to let you kind of take it away here. You wrote about it for the Commercial Appeal. You were there front and center. You know, I was watching up in there's a media section that's up top in the pinnacle level. And then there's the one courtside. You very deservingly are courtside, and you got to see firsthand all of the wonder that was Tony Allen. Again, the Grizzlies beat the Heat. It was a complete win. It was nice to see them play defense on Tony Allen night. Yeah. But, you know, just kind of your takeaways from that evening. You know, we talked a little bit before the show. I refuse to believe that there's anybody in the NBA that does it better than the Grizzlies. You know, from Lupe Fiasco to that is his name, right? I don't want.
Yeah. Chicago guy too.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I knew that. And I love Lupe. Like legitimately, I know I just asked to make sure I didn't mess up his name, but I legitimately loved his music. I loved the song that he walked out to. I loved, you know, I talked about the Future Go Harder thing, and they did the Future Go Harder thing.
On the game.
It was nostalgia washing over me. What was your takeaway from an evening that, again, the Grizzlies won? That's great. But it was about Tony Allen and the Memphis Grizzlies organization. Shout out to them. There's no way that anybody in the NBA does it better than them. I believe others do it well. There's no way anybody does it better.
Yeah, great job by the Grizzlies organization and really putting this together. And we know that Tony Allen the plan for his jersey retirement went into effect years and years ago. And we finally made it to the day. And it was everything that you could have imagined. My biggest takeaway above all, it's so much. Like we could talk for the entire show just about the entirety of the Tony Allen jersey retirement ceremony. But what stood out to me most was was not only who came back, because that's always telling in itself, but you had a nice, section of Grizzlies players that came back, right? Vince Carter, Quincy Pondexter, Beno Udrih. I don't want to name
Rudy Gay.
Yeah, Rudy Gay. Rudy Gay came back for Marc Gasol last year. He came back again always good to see Rudy. Rudy was the kid's favorite. He was our guy. When I was a kid, we loved the Rudy Gay. Everyone else was cool, but we loved the Rudy Gay. The kids did. But anyways, that's just a sidetrack. But so many players come in, right? And then there were the players he never really played with, but he had really good relationships with. Joakim Noah, Derrick Rose, right? And there was the non-Grizzlies players, the one he played with in Boston, and Paul Pierce. So he had all these different, people there. Mike Conley couldn't be able to come, and I think I said it on the show, maybe couple weeks ago. I don't know when I said it, but Mike Conley was planning on being there. That was the initial plan, but of course, if you've been paying attention to the weather, there's been storms, and of course, the Timberwolves are competing for a playoff spot. Completely understandable as to why Mike wasn't able to make it. But with all that being said, Joe, what really stood out to me, everyone did their talks, right? Zach Randolph talked. Derrick Rose, Paul Pierce, Rob Fisher, Pete and Brevin, Marc Gasol. They all did their little talks about Tony Allen. And then a 6-minute tribute video plays. Tony Allen gets the mic. And I didn't think he was ever going to put it down, Joe. But it's not just that. He's sitting on stage. There are former Grizzlies players up here. Former coach Lionel Hollins, his brothers up there, his relatives, his mom, his sisters. He went down the line, shouting out every single person that was up there and how they had special meaning to him. That's what I call a special person. And why that moment stood out to me the most, because he did it he talked about those people for like an hour. And he had a story for each one of them, talking about how Kim and Quincy Pondexter would go at it in practice, talking about how Vince Carter would try to help him fix his jump shot. Like, he had so many stories for everyone. But that moment to me was so telling of everything that we've heard about Tony Allen. The selflessness, the intensity, all the care factor, right? This is a guy that, again, averaged, it never averaged more than 10 points a game with the Grizzlies, but it was never about that for him. And that was an example. This is his night. And he's going around shouting out every single person. You don't see that a lot. A lot of people say, hey, I'm trying to keep it short and sweet. Nuh-uh, not Tony Allen. He got up there. He was talking and he was talking and he was talking. He went to his assistant coach in college, Glenn Cyprian, shouted him out. Lionel Hollins. He shouted out Jason Wallace, who was also in the building, former Grizzlies not Jason Wallace, Chris Wallace, excuse me.
Chris Wallace, yeah.
Yeah. Jason Wallace used to work in PR for the Grizzlies. Shout out to Jason Wallace. But anyways, Chris Wallace. With all that being said, he really showed that selflessness that really translated to the basketball floor. I thought that was really telling. Like, you can hear the stories about how someone puts the team first and things like that. That was a great example of it, because this is your day. This is when it's all about you. This is when you get to toot your horn and everybody celebrates you. And he took 50 plus minutes to talk about all the people that were there.
And that is very much Tony Allen in a nutshell. And again, TA is probably the first one of these, because Mike Conley's going to get the same treatment, right? And spoiler alert, I will be there for the Mike Conley one, because fingers crossed, there's always been this rumored grit and grind core 4 statue that's going to go up outside of FedEx Forum. And it kind of makes sense that they would shoot for Mike's retirement to unveil that with all 4 of them up in the rafters. So we'll see if that actually happens. But I think that, first off, don't feel bad about confusing Chris Wallace with Jason Wallace. Once upon a time, I said George Wallace. And we will not shout out George Wallace, the racist governor there in the South. Yeah, that was not good.
Could be worse, huh?
So, if it makes you feel better, as a history nerd, unfortunately, that was my first pool, and it was not good. So, shout out to Chris Wallace, former Grizzlies GM. I just wish you had traded Tyreek Evans. That's all. But I
wish he didn't trade Rudy Gay. So we all got
touche. Well, we have that in common. Although I would have traded Zebo. We're going to leave that alone. We're not going to. We'll save that for an off-season episode. You can yell at me for 10 minutes straight. But anyway, my thing is, I'm acknowledging it was wrong. we were talking about this before the show. The Grizzlies don't have, the Santa Ana winds and beautiful climate. It's hot as hell in the summer, right? You mentioned the storms that I lived in Memphis for 3 years. That's spring in Memphis. You have like 2 or 3 days of spring, and then it's ridiculous humidity and intense storms, and that's just kind of how it is there. And they don't have the geographical advantages, and they're not the place that young millionaires want to go and live. They're just not. And that's reality. It's not hating on Memphis. I love Memphis. I still do this.
Tony pointed it out that Allen
Tony
Iverson
said
didn't even want to be in Memphis. I mean,
but Tony Allen's real, right? And I think that is why Memphians love him, is because of how real he is. And that reality is for Memphis to keep guys that are key to what they want to do. They are going to have to go above and beyond to honor them. And I'm not saying that in a bad way. Tony Allen deserves every good thing that came his way on Saturday night. Every good thing, every good word, the hype videos, Lupe Fiasco, whatever it costs to bring him in, everything the TA got, he deserved. So I'm not trying to say that he didn't. But I think it's the Grizzlies organization understanding that when you have something special, when you have a special player, a special talent, whatever the case might be, you need to make sure that they understand that they are valued and that they can be something in Memphis that they cannot be anywhere else. They can't be, I said before we started recording, someone could go to the Lakers and be the 23rd greatest Laker in the history of the Los Angeles Lakers, and nobody cares when you retire. Oh, that guy was on the Lakers. Good player, right? And they move on. Or you could be on the Memphis Grizzlies and make such an impact in the community, in the organization, that you have, to be honest with you, pedestrian offensive numbers. And again, TA talked about that. He talked about how they put him in the corner and said, get out of the way of the offense. TA said that. You could be a below average offensive player, an elite defensive player, and be a legend. Tony Allen is a legend, a made man in Memphis, Tennessee. And that happens. I struggle to believe that happens anywhere else. Like if TA had stayed in Boston, he's not getting his number retired. Never happens. Never. It's not going to be a thing. He's a role player, right? That plays Paul Pierce in practice. And he's giving speeches at Paul Pierce's retirement about how he was able to defend the truth every day. It's not Paul Pierce coming to Memphis and talking about how proud he is of his little brother flying and growing and being what he became with the Memphis Grizzlies. So shout out to TA, shout out to Memphis. I had a phenomenal time. I'm so glad I went, and it was a really special night. If you were there, hit us up on X. Let us know in the comments how you're feeling about TA. And again, the Grizzlies won. It was a great performance, one of their best all-around games they've played in a long time. When we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies, we are going to continue this conversation, put a more modern turn on it. I posed a question on X on Sunday asking who's next on the modern Grizzlies. We know the core four is going up in the rafters. Who on the modern Grizzlies could be the next to have their numbers retired down the road? We'll talk about that next. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by DoorDash. Big fan of DoorDash, and you should be as well. NBA fans, they swoosh, you save. Thanks to Dash Pass, every time a player drops 50 or more points in a game, you score a huge deal the next day. It is simple. When any player scores 50 or more in a game during the 2024-2025 NBA regular season, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order up to $10 off the next day from noon to midnight. After an epic 50-point performance, you can celebrate by ordering wings, pizza, or burgers from your favorite spot delivered straight to your door. Or if you need a quick and easy lunch the next day, with Dash Pass, you can get your favorite meals with $0 delivery fees and reduced service fees. Plus, now you save even more with this exclusive NBA offer. Sign up for Dash Pass and be ready to save. When any player scores 50 or more in a game, Dash Pass members get 50% off an order the next day up to $10 off. Just use the promo code NBA50 from noon to midnight after a 50-point game on eligible orders at participating merchants. You must have an active Dash Pass account. Terms apply. Visit DoorDash to learn more. And again, noon to midnight the day after the game. This is exclusive to Dash Pass members. So make sure you join as soon as possible if you haven't already done so. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is also brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is officially here. FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. I have my eye on a few underdogs this year. Maybe the VCU Rams in my my native Richmond space. The Memphis Tigers got a surprisingly good draw in the tournament. FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. Plus, the FanDuel app is simple to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. So go visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. All right, Damichael, so I posed this question on X. How many current Grizzlies will wind up having their numbers retired by the organization upon their playing careers concluding? So if we all agree that Mark, Mike, obviously, Mark, Zebo, and TA already have theirs done now, right, after the ceremony on Saturday. Mike Conley will be the fourth, right? That will be the next one whenever Mike is done. I talked to Parker Fleming, mutual friend Parker Fleming. Shout out to Parker. Talked to him on Saturday about that. Maybe a couple more years for Mike, maybe one more contract in him. Maybe not. Whenever Mike is done, his jersey will be retired, and that will be that. Of this current Grizzlies group, 0, 1, 2, 3 or more were the options, thanks to the about 320 folks that voted in the poll. 53.9%. That was the win. So a majority of those that voted. They said 2 of the current Grizzlies would wind up having their numbers retired. Ja and Jaren have done enough on the court was kind of the overall takeaway. Savannah, shout out to Savannah for posting that on X. Technically, Ja and Jaren have done enough on the court for the jersey retirement, but TA did so much more than just play basketball. It was emotional. It was beautiful. I thought that was very well said. And that's kind of where I am. Because to me, I would say 1, Damichael. I would say 1 as of now, current trajectory, and it's Jaren Jackson Jr. Because he marries the two things. Like, he is going to be an all-NBA player, almost certainly, as long as he makes that 65-game threshold. He is going to be an all-defensive player. He marries the elite NBA player like Marc Gasol was. With the community connection and aspect. It's not the same as TA and Zebo. I'm not trying to make it seem like it is. But you don't look at Jaren and say he's not active in the Memphis community, because that's not true. He's very active. So he combines the two. Ja has obviously been elite. Ja has been active in the community, but we don't need to go down the list. There's been inconsistencies. Desmond Bane, very active in the community, but he's also kind of the steady as he goes. Has he done enough on the court to this point? Is he a guy that is in that same kind of stratosphere? So for me right now, Damichael, I would say 1 that can obviously change. What say you? How are you feeling about this question? Who's next up for the Grizzlies?
Well, I'll say that the comparisons to that core and this one aren't necessarily parallels, because that core, the grit and grind core, it was less. Of course, it wasn't about TA's, so to speak, numbers, but even for the rest of the core, it wasn't really about that, because that was plus. That's what really kind of solidified them in a way. But the entire grit and grind thing, to me, and to when you talk to people about it, is they brought an identity to the Memphis Grizzlies, a franchise that had been in the league up to that point, 10 years in Memphis. They brought an identity, and you had teams that had played hard up to that point, but never won a playoff game, been swept a few times, things like that. But those were the teams, and they consistently did it every year. And as Tony Allen said, he said before that, we felt like, people would see Memphis on there and mark it off as a W. But, after that, you knew that you come to Memphis, it wasn't going to be just a regular day. And they made sure of that. But with all that being said, this Grizzlies core, I think they'll be judged on a harsher scale. A harsher may not be the right word, a tougher scale, so to speak. Like, you can't just say, oh, Ja made more All-Star games than this guy, so he's going to be there. Or Jaren made more All-Star games. Or Dez averaged more points than Zebo or Tony, and etc. So he deserves it. It's an indirect comparison. Now, with that being said, right now I'm going to lean 2. I think Jaren Jackson Jr., like you said, is an excellent for what he's done in the community, for what he's done on the basketball floor. You talked about this season, he could be making his 3rd first team all defensive selection, which would match Tony Allen, most in Grizzlies history. He's on the path to do that. right now. In addition to that, he could potentially win Defensive Player of the Year for a second time. No Grizzlies player has ever done that. Potentially could do that. And then you mentioned the community work that he does. What's understood doesn't have to be explained, as they usually say. Same case with Ja Morant, and I think Ja Morant's kind of a no-brainer too, because he's the best player that the Grizzlies have ever had in franchise history. Now, there are some inconsistencies, that you mentioned, and one of them we're going to talk about in the next segment. But at the same time, no one has brought that flair, that style that Ja Morant has done to Memphis. He's put the Grizzlies, in a different light, and that should continue to grow. Like the ceiling for what Ja means to Memphis should be much bigger now that we have, what happened over the last 2 years kind of in the rearview mirror now, and it's starting to be more about what he's doing on the basketball floor. Desmond Bane has a really solid case eventually. I think he will, because if this is the core, and if this is the core they're going to ride with for the next 5, 6, 7 years or so, Desmond Bane will be in there. He'll get his jersey retired. But you could make a case that Desmond Bane, for lack of better words, will get Rudy Gate at some point. I'm not saying that it will happen, but you could say, we look back in 15 years and you were at Jaren's jersey retirement, and people are saying, "Oh, why did the Grizzlies trade Desmond Bane? Or is he the one that got it?" Well, it's possible. Not saying that I think it'll happen, but if you look at the numbers and whatnot, it feels like, we saw what Zach Kleiman said about the idea of trading Jaren Jackson Jr. We saw, about trading Ja Morant, excuse me. We saw how when at the trade deadline, when Zach Kleiman talked about the idea of building around Jaren Jackson Jr. more, essentially saying they want him back for the long term here. So with all that kind of being known at this point, and we know how much Desmond Bane means, I think if Desmond Bane's here for the next 5, 6, 7 years, he's a lock. He's a lock. But that is the one question. I don't think it's about his numbers as much as his tenure, because if he's here for a while, that'll automatically mean that the team is having a lot of success. That'll mean that Ja, Des, and Jaren as a core have done some really good things, and potentially even done things that haven't been done here before. And that's kind of what can set them apart. Maybe going to the Western Conference Finals, winning some games, or even making an NBA Finals appearance, or even winning an NBA championship.
I think that you made a really fair point there, and you sold me on Morant. I'm back in on Ja being on the list, so I'm at 2 now. You sold me on Ja. The measuring stick has to be different, right? It has to be different because the bar has been raised, right? When the Grizzlies made it to the Western Conference Finals, did people want to go to the NBA Finals? Yeah, they did. Mm-hmm. Was that the expectation? I was there. No, it wasn't the expectation. You didn't want to get swept by the Spurs like the way that it happened, but everybody understood what was happening, right? The magical run that they were on. I talk about the 2015 team all the time. To me, there were heightened expectations for that group than the one that actually made the Western Conference Finals. And when you're looking at this group, we're talking about if they don't get out of the first round, they might lose their head coach. That was said at times during the grit and grind era. But it was more so, champagne taste on a beer budget being said out loud by Lionel Hollins. It was, Dave Yeager not being able to fully move on and do things a certain way. It was different kind of situations. You didn't look at the Grizzlies and say they are so talented, they should be an NBA Finals contender. You say that about them now. And I do think that bar has to be raised and adjusted a little bit to compare them to what grit and grind was. And as a grit and grind aficionado, that's not fair to Ja. That's not fair to Jaren. That's not fair to Des. So I think you made a good point there. Let us know in the comments what you're thinking. Hit us up on X at Damichael C, at Joe Mullinax. Sounds like Damichael's closer to 3 than 2, giving Des an inside lane there, maybe 2.5.
Yeah, for sure. 2.5 is a good way to put it.
I'm at 2 now. I'm at 2. Damichael convinced me on Ja Morant being in that mix, and Jaren we're unanimous on. Let us know what you guys are thinking. Happy to talk with you about that when we come back here on Locked On Grizzlies. Ja Morant out for tonight's game against the Kings. We're going to preview that game and the West Coast trip ahead. Stick around. Today's episode of Locked On Grizzlies is brought to you by Monarch Money. Have you ever checked your bank account and wondered, where did all my money go? Well, today I know where it went, Memphis, Tennessee. Between dining out, online shopping, I regret nothing, by the way. Shout out Gus's Fried Chicken. And entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you realize just how much you save and how much you're spending on food delivery. Now you can budget smarter and save more, and it allows for you to collaborate easily with your partner. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever before. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Go check them out.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
We're getting fancy here at Locked On. How about that, Damichael? That's a big deal. Shout out to our college basketball folks. Obviously, it's March Madness time. Hopefully, you're going to check out that wonderful show that they're doing. And word is they might be expanding this for the NBA playoffs. So maybe you'll see your boys, Joe and Damichael, probably not in the studio. They'll pick Damichael for that. They will not pick me for the studio show, but that's okay.
Joe. Yeah.
But anyway, I have a face for podcasting. I've been told, a face made for radio. The Memphis Grizzlies, it was a good news, bad news on the injury report, right? The good news is the old questionable designation, or doubtful. It might have been doubtful for Santi. Doubtful. There you go. So doubtful for Santi Aldama, which means the next game he likely will return for the Memphis Grizzlies later on this week. Won't play more than likely against the Kings. But John Morant just outright listed as out for the Sacramento game. I think it was his shoulder against the Heat, and now it's his hamstring. So he really was beat up after the Cavs game, it sounds like, in the 44 points that he dropped on Cleveland. Damichael, any insight you can give into the Morant issue? Obviously, the Grizzlies on their longest road trip of the year now. How does Memphis react to this Morant situation? Do we expect this to be a more long-term thing, or do you think it's just going to be truly day-to-day?
Yeah, I haven't heard too much about it at this point. I did, reach out to some people and did get much, but just something that they want to be careful with, right? And it's hamstring, and in this day and age, hamstring injuries. We talked about it at the beginning of the season, how soft tissue injuries, if you kind of nag on them and you pull on them a little bit, it could turn into something, even longer term. So we'll see what Taylor says, out in Sacramento, and kind of get, a better gauge of, what happened here. But he was, going into the Heat game, it was the shoulder soreness. So this had to be something that more than likely kind of flared up afterwards in that case. So we'll learn more in the coming days. But really interested to see because right now, the Western Conference is very tight, and you're talking about at the time of this recording, 3 teams tied for the second spot. Now, the order is I think Houston 2, Denver 3, Memphis 4, but all 3 teams have a 43-25 record. The Lakers also won them yesterday, so now they're 41-25. So if you add the loss column, 4 teams with exactly 25 losses. So you need John Morant out there, and this Kings team isn't one to be taken lightly.
Yeah, the Kings are a team that are also fighting for their playoff lives, right? They're a squad that has been cooling off of late. They had that really random, they fired their head coach, and they had a really strong run there where they were having some success and they were winning some games. That's not the current case. They have lost 4 games in a row. Now, in fairness to them, they lost to the Clippers by 1. We know the Clippers are a competitive team. The Knicks have beaten up on the Grizzlies in the past, and the Knicks beat up on the Kings. Golden State, with Jimmy Butler in town, is now a very different team. They dominated Sacramento. The one that gives me pause, partner, is the Suns, because Memphis has obviously kind of been able to have their way with the Suns, or at least winning competitive games against Phoenix. Phoenix wins against Sacramento by about 16 the last time out for the Kings. Memphis has won 4 of their last 5. The Kings have only won 1 of their last 5. This is a game that Memphis should win, right? In terms of being favored, I'm not sure. It's probably going to be a pick'em kind of game.
Yeah, it's pretty much right now at FanDuel. Actually, you got. It's pretty much a pick'em. Though the Grizzlies, with the spread are like a slight favorite. Money line is
minus 1.5 or something like that.
It's minus 110 on the money line for the Grizzlies.
Oh, there you go. That's a pick'em.
Yeah, minus 106 right now for the Kings over at FanDuel. But yeah, it's pretty much a toss up. If you just look at offensive firepower, honestly, the Kings have more in this game. Zach LaVine, who started off really struggling from 3-point range with this team, is playing a little bit better. So you got Zach LaVine, you got DeMar DeRozan, who's reliable. He's going to get to the mid range. You got to be very careful with your hands. On the defensive end with him, Domantas Sabonis is a guy who's given the Grizzlies a lot of trouble over the years. But no De'Aaron Fox is his running mate anymore. Malik Monk, we know how explosive he can be. Also another guy, really good scorer. So everything kind of goes around, those guys. Keegan Murray, we know the Grizzlies have this ability to leave guys open from 3-point range. That's the one guy you don't want to leave Keegan Murray open, because he'll make you pay. So they got a lot of offensive firepower, on that end of the floor. And you also get to see a former friend, Jake LaRavia's first game against the Grizzlies as well.
Jonas Valanciunas on the Kings now as well. So there's a couple former Grizzlies in the mix there in Sacramento. Should be an interesting game. Make sure you're following with Damichael at Damichael C. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to watch the first quarter probably, and then I'm going to go to bed because I'm old and I'm washed. This is their longest road trip of the year.
West Coast trip right here, Joe. Mm-hmm. It's not your cup of tea.
So spoiler alert, Damichael's going to have a couple of individual episodes this week. Which is okay. I'll make up for it down the road. But it's going to be an interesting game. I can't wait to, whenever I go to bed, I wake up early. I wake up about 5 a.m. every day, go for a run or a walk every morning. And then I'll sit down before my kids and wife wake up, and I'll watch the 45-minute version of the game, and I'll fast forward through commercials and that sort of thing and halftime. But anyway, Damichael, what do you foresee talking about with our wonderful everydayers on tomorrow's show?
3-point defense is going to be a big talking point potentially, because we just mentioned how some teams have kind of made the Grizzlies pay for their they try to. It's worked for the Grizzlies at time. They identified the weakest links, the weakest shooters, and they play this roaming style defense. It's not the only type of defense that the Grizzlies play. They have switched some things up to a certain degree, but it is the most notable, and it is kind of a way that the teams have picked them apart. In recent weeks, there's also been, the perimeter defense struggling to keep guys in front of him. So, now you got Malik Monk, you got Zach LaVine, you got DeMar DeRozan, all guys that are tough to keep in front of you. It's going to take a strong defense tonight. Vince Williams is back, after missing the second leg of that previous back-to-back. He's not on the injury report. So now you got him back into the fold as well. I want to see if he's going to really start to turn the corner if you're late, because they're going to need it. I mean, we're talking about 14 games left in the regular season at this point. So they had a good defensive performance against the Heat. Want to see if they can continue to trend up as you go on this West Coast trip with a couple big games on it.
Well, one of the nice things about this West Coast trip is no back-to-backs, right? They have the Kings on Monday. They have Portland on Wednesday, Clippers on Friday. Then they have 3 days off. That's going to be deadly. It's going to be right. Well, it's going to be great for them. That means they get a free day, I'm guessing, in Los Angeles, California. So I'll leave that one alone. So they don't play again until Tuesday against the Utah Jazz. If I were young and a millionaire, I don't blame them. And then Thursday, the 27th, they take on the Oklahoma City Thunder. That's the last game. So no back-to-backs on this stretch, which hopefully means Vince Williams Jr. Gets out there and gets into a rhythm. That would be something that I would want to watch for. Make sure you're hitting us up on X at Damichael C, at Joe Mullinax. How are you feeling about tonight's game? The West Coast Roadie at large. It's going to be fun, and I can't wait to catch Damichael's solo episode of the show on Tuesday. Make sure you're liking, commenting, rating, reviewing, subscribing wherever you get podcasts, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, YouTube. It's all good. Make us a part of your NBA and Memphis Grizzlies content consumption each and every time that an episode drops. Also, make sure that you're checking out LockedOnDaily.com and subscribing to our free daily newsletter. I wrote about the Tony Allen event and all the wonderful stuff from this past weekend for today's newsletter. So make sure you're going and checking that out, subscribing at LockedOnDaily.com. For my partner, Damichael, I am Joe. Stay locked in. We will catch you guys tomorrow here on Locked On Grizzlies, free and available, YouTube, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, wherever you get podcasts. Shout out to the Grindfather, man. See ya.